The slave markets of Kepler Station buzzed with the usual chaos of commerce and cruelty. Alien merchants barked prices in a dozen languages, while potential buyers examined their merchandise with cold, calculating eyes. Among the cramped cages that lined the grimy corridors, one particular cell held a figure that had long since stopped hoping for freedom. Zara pressed herself against the far corner of her enclosure, her violet skin bearing the faded scars of countless punishments. Her once proud Zenthari features had been dulled by years of captivity, her natural luminescence reduced to barely a flicker beneath her translucent flesh. The neural control collar around her neck hummed with malevolent energy, ready to deliver agony at the slightest hint of disobedience. She had been property for so long that she barely remembered her birth name. The slavers called her 749, a designation that reduced her entire existence to mere inventory. Her last owner, a Graxian mining baron, had worked her nearly to death in the asteroid fields before selling her to recover his losses. Now she waited for another master, another lifetime of servitude stretching endlessly before her. The Zenthari had once been a proud species, known throughout the galaxy for their artistic achievements and philosophical wisdom, but their pacifist nature had made them easy targets when the hegemony's expansion reached their homeworld. Those who survived the conquest were scattered across the stars as slaves, their culture systematically erased, their children born into bondage. Zara watched as potential buyers passed her cage, their alien eyes appraising her worth like she was livestock. A hulking Krathan warlord paused to examine her muscular build, clearly considering her for gladiatorial combat. Behind him, a Severian merchant studied her with the cold calculation of someone evaluating mining equipment. Neither showed any recognition that she was a sentient being with thoughts and feelings. The auction block beckoned from the center of the market, where slaves were displayed and sold to the highest bidder. Zara had stood on that platform 3 times before, each sale marking another descent into despair. She knew the routine by heart. The auctioneer would list her physical capabilities, her work history, her medical records, and any special skills that might increase her value. Her hopes, dreams, and the remnants of her shattered identity would never be mentioned. As the day wore on, fewer buyers showed interest in her cage. Her age was beginning to show, and the recent malnutrition had left her weaker than the prime specimens that commanded top prices. She might end up in the industrial sectors, where slaves were literally worked to death or worse, sold to the research facilities where Zenthari were used for medical experiments. The sound of unfamiliar footsteps caught her attention. A figure approached her cage, moving with a strange confidence that set him apart from the other buyers. Zara looked up to see a being unlike any she had encountered before. He stood upright on 2 legs like many species, but his skin was smooth and pink, his eyes a startling blue color. Most unusual of all, he wore no visible weapons or status symbols that marked the typical slave owner. The human knelt down beside her cage, bringing himself to her eye level. For the first time in years, someone was looking at her face instead of evaluating her body for its utility. His expression held something she had almost forgotten existed: compassion. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said in perfect galactic standard, though his accent was unlike anything she had heard before. "My name is Captain Marcus Chen of the Earth vessel Defiance. I'm going to get you out of here." Zara stared at him in confusion. The words made no sense. No one bought slaves to free them. It had to be some kind of trick, perhaps a new form of psychological torture designed to break her spirit completely. She had learned long ago not to trust the kindness of strangers, especially those with enough credits to afford property like her. Yet something in his eyes suggested he was telling the truth. There was a determination there, a burning anger directed not at her but at her circumstances. He looked around the slave market with obvious disgust. His hands clenched into fists as he took in the sight of hundreds of beings trapped in cages. The human stood and walked away without another word, leaving Zara more confused than ever. Within minutes, the slave trader arrived at her cage, his keyring jangling with the sound of impending sale. But instead of leading her to the auction block, he unlocked her enclosure and gestured for her to follow him to the transaction desk. "Sold to the human for full asking price," the trader announced with obvious pleasure. "No haggling, no inspection period, paid in untraceable credits." Strange creature, that one. Didn't even ask about warranties or return policies. As the credits transferred and ownership papers changed hands, Zara felt a familiar numbness settle over her. Another master, another life of servitude. At least this one seemed less cruel than most, though she had learned that appearances could be deceiving. Perhaps he would be kind to her, treat her well as long as she served faithfully. It was the best she could hope for in a galaxy that had shown her nothing but cruelty. The neural collar around her neck chirped as its control frequency transferred to the human's personal device. She was now his property as surely as any tool or weapon. The only difference was that he had looked her in the eyes when he claimed her, something that still puzzled her hours later as she waited in a holding cell for transport to his ship. The transport shuttle to the human ship was unlike anything Zara had experienced before. Instead of the cramped cargo hold she expected, she found herself seated in what appeared to be a passenger compartment. The human, Marcus, sat across from her, making no attempt to assert dominance or establish the hierarchy she had grown accustomed to. "Are you hungry?" he asked, producing a ration pack from his bag. "I know the food on Kepler Station isn't much, and I doubt they've been feeding you properly." Zara stared at the offered meal in bewilderment. Masters didn't share food with their property. They provided the minimum necessary nutrition to keep their slaves functional. Nothing more. This had to be some kind of test, but she couldn't understand its purpose. Cautiously, she shook her head, unwilling to risk punishment for presuming above her station. Marcus seemed to understand her hesitation. He opened the pack and began eating, demonstrating that it wasn't poisoned or tainted. Then he placed a second pack on the seat beside her. "It's yours if you want it. No strings attached." The smell of real food, not the nutritional paste she had subsisted on for months, made her stomach clench with hunger. Still, she didn't move. Years of conditioning had taught her that accepting unexpected kindness always came with a price, usually paid in pain when the master's true nature revealed itself. "You don't trust me," Marcus observed, his tone matter-of-fact rather than accusatory. "That's smart. Trust has to be earned, especially after what you've been through. But I want you to know something important. I didn't buy you to own you. I bought you to free you." The word struck her like a physical blow. Freedom was a concept so foreign to her current existence that she had trouble even processing what he meant. Slaves didn't get freed. They changed hands, they aged out of usefulness, they died in service. Freedom was a fairy tale told by naive younglings who hadn't yet learned the harsh realities of galactic civilization. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. The neural collar detected her speech and delivered a mild shock as punishment for speaking without permission. She gasped and pressed her hand to her throat, waiting for the human to activate the more severe punishment settings. Instead, Marcus pulled out a small device and began working with intense concentration. "This collar," he said, not looking up from his work, "is an abomination. My species has strong feelings about devices designed to control other sentient beings. We've had some experience with the concept, and we didn't like how it turned out." Zara watched in fascination as he manipulated the strange tool. She had never seen technology like it before, and the way he worked suggested an intimate knowledge of neural control systems. The collar around her neck had been her constant companion for so long that she had stopped noticing its weight, but now she became acutely aware of its presence. "There," Marcus said with satisfaction. "That should disable the pain circuits without triggering the anti-tamper systems. You can speak freely now." She tested his claim with a single word. "Why?" When no shock came, she felt tears gather in her eyes for the first time in years. The simple act of speaking without pain felt like a miracle. "Because you're a person, not property," Marcus replied simply. "Where I come from, we have a saying, all sentient beings are created equal. It's taken us a long time to live up to that ideal, but we keep trying." The shuttle docked with his ship, and Zara got her first look at human engineering. The vessel was sleek and purposeful, clearly designed for speed rather than comfort. But what struck her most was the absence of the usual markers of hierarchy. No slave quarters, no punishment chambers, no visible security systems designed to maintain order through fear. Marcus led her through corridors that seemed designed for cooperation rather than domination. The crew members they passed nodded respectfully to both of them, showing no surprise at seeing an unrestrained Xanthari walking freely through their ship. It was then that Zara realized something extraordinary. She wasn't the only former slave aboard this vessel. Catherian engineer with the characteristic markings of industrial bondage worked alongside what appeared to be a free human technician. A Zanari pilot, her cranial port still showing signs of neural programming, operated navigation systems with obvious skill and pride. Everywhere she looked, Zara saw beings who should have been properly functioning as valued crew members. "Welcome to the Defiance," Marcus said, noticing her amazement. "We're what you might call a collection of refugees and volunteers. Everyone here has chosen to be here, and everyone can choose to leave. It's a radical concept in this part of the galaxy, but it seems to work for us." He showed her to a small but comfortable cabin that he claimed was hers for as long as she wanted it. The room had a real bed, a personal sanitation unit, and even a small viewport looking out at the stars. Luxuries beyond imagination for someone who had spent years sleeping on metal floors in cramped cells. "I'll leave you to get settled," Marcus said. "Dr. Voss will be by later to remove that collar properly and check on your health. After that, we can talk about what you'd like to do next." As the door closed behind him, Zara sank onto the bed and tried to process what was happening to her. The human spoke of choices and freedom as if they were natural rights rather than impossible dreams. He treated her with a dignity she had forgotten she deserved, and his crew seemed to accept her presence without question or suspicion. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope that perhaps there really was life beyond slavery. Dr. Sarah Voss arrived at Zara's cabin with a medical kit, and the warmest smile the Zenthari had seen in decades. The human physician was gentle but thorough as she examined the neural collar, using scanners that revealed the full extent of its cruel design. "This is going to take some time," Dr. Voss explained as she worked. "The hegemony really outdid themselves with this model. It's not just a pain delivery system. It's also been suppressing your natural bioluminescence and dampening your emotional responses. No wonder you feel disconnected from yourself." Zara lay still as the doctor worked, afraid that any movement might disrupt the delicate process. She had seen what happened when collar removal went wrong. The anti-tamper systems could deliver a shock powerful enough to cause permanent brain damage or death. Yet Dr. Voss worked with a confidence that suggested extensive experience with such devices. "How many?" Zara asked quietly. "How many like me have you freed?" "The Defiance has liberated over 300 individuals in the past 2 years," Dr. Voss replied, her hands steady despite the complexity of her task. "Captain Chen started this mission after witnessing a slave auction on Proxima 7. He said it reminded him of something from humanity's own dark history, and he couldn't stand by and do nothing." The collar finally released with a soft click, and Zara gasped as sensation flooded back into her neck and skull. Colors seemed brighter, sounds clearer, and for the first time in years she could feel the natural rhythm of her own heartbeat without the collar's interference. Most remarkably, her skin began to glow with the soft violet light that was her species' heritage. "Beautiful," Dr. Voss murmured, stepping back to admire the change. "Your people's bioluminescence is supposed to reflect emotional states, isn't it? I've read that Zenthari art forms were based on light patterns and color variations." Zara nodded, touching her throat in wonder. "We called it soul singing. The light was how we expressed what words couldn't capture. I haven't glowed in so long I thought I had lost the ability forever. The human body has an amazing capacity for healing," the doctor said, beginning to pack up her equipment, "both physical and emotional. It just needs the right environment and enough time. You're safe here, Zara. Safe to heal, safe to remember who you were before all this happened." After Dr. Voss left, Zara stood before the small mirror in her cabin and studied her reflection. The face looking back at her was familiar yet strange, marked by suffering but beginning to show signs of life returning. Her natural luminescence pulsed gently beneath her skin, responding to emotions she had kept buried for years. A soft chime at her door interrupted her contemplation. Marcus entered at her invitation, carrying a tray of food that smelled infinitely better than anything she had eaten in captivity. He set it down on the small table and gestured for her to join him. "Real Terran cuisine," he explained as she approached cautiously. "Dr. Voss suggested that proper nutrition would help with your recovery. I hope you don't mind that I took the liberty of researching Zenthari dietary requirements." The meal was a revelation. Fresh vegetables, properly seasoned proteins, and flavors that awakened taste buds she had forgotten she possessed. As she ate, Marcus talked casually about the ship and its mission, never pressuring her to respond but clearly inviting conversation. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "What do you expect of me in return for this kindness?" Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Nothing," You don't owe me anything. You're free to stay aboard as long as you like, or we can drop you off at any safe port you prefer. Some of our rescues choose to join the crew. Others prefer to start new lives elsewhere. The choice is entirely yours. I don't understand your people, Zara admitted. The galaxy is built on hierarchies, on power and subjugation. Every species I've encountered believes in the natural order of dominance. Yet you speak of equality as if it's possible. Maybe it's because we learned the hard way, Marcus replied thoughtfully. Humanity spent millennia perfecting various forms of cruelty and oppression. We enslaved our own species based on skin color, religion, nationality, or economic status. We built entire civilizations on the backs of people we convinced ourselves were less than human. He paused, his expression growing distant. But eventually we realized that our strength came not from domination, but from cooperation. When we finally learned to see each other as equals, we became capable of incredible things. We reached the stars not through conquest, but through unity. And now you apply these lessons to other species? We try, Marcus said with a rueful smile. It's not always easy. The galaxy doesn't approve of our methods. The hegemony considers us terrorists. The Trade Federation wants us classified as pirates, and even some of the neutral worlds think we're dangerously naive. But we've seen what happens when power goes unchecked, and we refuse to stand by and let it continue. That night, as Zara lay in her comfortable bed looking out at the stars, she tried to process everything that had happened. In the space of a single day, she had gone from hopeless slave to free individual. The human captain asked nothing of her except that she make her own choices about her future. For someone who had been property for so long, the concept of choice was almost paralyzing. What did she want? Who was she beneath the years of conditioning and abuse? The question seemed impossibly large, but for the first time in memory, she had the luxury of time to explore them. Her skin pulsed with gentle patterns of light as emotions she had suppressed for years began to surface. Hope, curiosity, and something that might have been joy flickered across her features in the ancient language of her people. She was beginning to remember what it felt like to be truly alive. 3 weeks aboard the Defiance transformed Zara in ways she hadn't thought possible. The constant fear that had defined her existence began to fade, replaced by cautious curiosity about the world around her. She spent hours in the ship's small library, rediscovering the history and culture of her own people through texts that the humans had painstakingly preserved. The crew treated her with a casual respect that still amazed her. They included her in conversations, asked for her opinions, and never made her feel like an outsider despite her lack of useful skills. When she expressed interest in learning, they eagerly shared their knowledge without expecting anything in return. Kes, the Catherian engineer, became her first real friend in decades. The reptilian woman had been enslaved as a child and forced to work in weapons manufacturing before her rescue 6 months earlier. She understood the difficulty of adjusting to freedom in ways that the naturally free crew members couldn't. The hardest part, Kes explained as they worked together in the hydroponics bay, is learning to trust your own judgments again. For so long we were told what to think, what to feel, what to want. Now we have to figure out who we really are underneath all that conditioning. Zara nodded, carefully tending the earth vegetables that Dr. Voss was using to supplement everyone's nutrition. The simple act of nurturing growing things felt deeply satisfying, connecting her to memories of her homeworld's vast gardens. I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm doing something wrong or that I don't have permission to be here. That feeling never completely goes away, Kes admitted. But it gets easier. Captain Chen says that healing isn't a destination, it's a journey. Some days are better than others, but every day we're free is a victory over those who tried to break us. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent announcement from the bridge. All crew members were to report for an emergency briefing. Zara hesitated, unsure if she should attend, but Kes grabbed her arm and pulled her along. You're part of this crew now, whether you realize it or not, the engineer said firmly. We don't leave anyone behind. The bridge was crowded with the Defiance's diverse crew as Marcus explained the situation. They had received a distress signal from a research station in the Outer Rim, reporting that hegemony raiders had attacked and captured several scientists for sale in the slave markets. The station personnel are requesting immediate assistance, Marcus continued. They can't offer payment and the mission carries significant risk. The raider ship is a heavy cruiser with military-grade weapons and shields. We're outgunned and outnumbered. The captain looked around the assembled crew with obvious pride. This is exactly the kind of situation the Defiance was created to handle. But I won't order anyone into unnecessary danger. This has to be a volunteer mission. To Zara's amazement, every single crew member immediately volunteered. These people, many of them former slaves themselves, were willing to risk their lives to save strangers they had never met. The casual heroism of it left her speechless. "What about weapons?" asked Torres, the human weapons specialist. "That cruiser has enough firepower to vaporize us if we approach conventionally." Marcus smiled grimly. "That's where human ingenuity comes in. We're not going to fight them ship to ship. We're going to board them and rescue the prisoners from the inside. It's dangerous, but it's our best chance." The plan that emerged was audacious in its simplicity. The Defiance would disguise itself as a disabled merchant vessel, broadcasting false distress signals to lure the raiders into a rescue attempt. When they came aboard expecting easy salvage, they would instead find a fully armed rescue team ready to turn the tables. "I want to help," Zara said suddenly, surprising herself as much as everyone else. "I know hegemony ship layouts, security procedures, slave-holding protocols. I can be useful." Marcus studied her carefully. "Are you sure? You don't owe us anything, and this mission could go very wrong very quickly. For the first time in my life, I have the chance to fight back instead of just enduring," Zara replied, her skin flickering with determination. "Those scientists deserve the same chance at freedom you gave me. I won't stand by and do nothing." The next few hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Zara found herself fitted with armor and weapons, learning basic combat techniques from crew members who seemed determined to keep her alive. The trust they placed in her felt both terrifying and exhilarating. As the Defiance moved into position, Zara realized that she was no longer thinking of herself as a former slave or rescued property. She was part of something larger now, a crew united by shared purpose rather than divided by artificial hierarchies. The humans had shown her that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, but the presence of choice and the power to act on principles rather than fear. The raider ship appeared on their sensors, approaching fast with weapons powered but not yet targeted. The final phase of their plan was about to begin, and Zara felt her natural luminescence pulse with anticipation. For the first time in her adult life, she was about to fight for something that mattered. The old Zara would have cowered in the cargo hold, hoping to avoid notice until the danger passed. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who understood that freedom was worth fighting for, even at the risk of losing everything. As the hegemony raiders prepared to board what they thought was a helpless merchant vessel, they had no idea they were walking into a trap set by people who refused to accept the galaxy's cruel status quo. The hegemony raiders took the bait perfectly. Their boarding party of 12 heavily armed Krathens stormed onto the Defiance expecting to find frightened merchants, but instead walked into a carefully orchestrated ambush. The first wave fell to stun weapons before they even realized they were under attack. Zara moved through the ship's corridors with deadly purpose, her knowledge of hegemony protocols proving invaluable. She guided the rescue team through the raider vessel's maze of passages, avoiding security checkpoints and automated defenses that would have slowed a conventional assault. "Slave quarters are 2 levels down," she whispered into her communicator as they reached the main cargo area. "Standard configuration puts the most valuable prisoners in the center cells, surrounded by expendable merchandise." Captain Chen's strike team followed her lead without question, their trust in her tactical knowledge complete despite her lack of formal military training. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same expertise that had once made her a valuable slave was now being used to free others from the same fate. They encountered minimal resistance as they descended deeper into the ship. Most of the raiders were still unconscious from the initial assault, and those who remained were scrambling to respond to what they clearly hadn't expected. The hegemony's arrogance had become their weakness, blinding them to the possibility that their victims might fight back. The slave quarters were exactly as Zara remembered, rows of cramped cages filled with terrified beings from a dozen different species. The captured scientists huddled together in the center section, their academic robes torn and dirty but their spirits not yet broken. Around them, other prisoners watched the rescue team with expressions of desperate hope mixed with disbelief. "Is this real?" asked one of the scientists, an elderly Andromedan whose cranial ridges were marked with the blue tattoos of high academic rank. "Are you actually here to help us?" Very real, Marcus replied, using his electronic lockpicks to open the cage doors. We're getting all of you out of here. Can everyone walk? Zara moved from cage to cage, her natural luminescence providing reassurance to the frightened prisoners. Her light pattern spoke directly to their emotional centers, conveying safety and hope in ways that words couldn't match. Several of the younger captives reached out to touch her glowing skin, finding comfort in the ancient Zinthari art of soul singing. The evacuation proceeded smoothly until they reached the upper levels. The remaining raiders had finally organized a coherent defense, setting up energy barriers and automated turrets to block their escape route. The rescue team found themselves pinned down in a maintenance corridor, unable to advance without exposing the civilians to crossfire. We need a distraction, Torres muttered, studying the tactical display on his scanner. Something to draw their attention away from the primary route. I'll do it, Zara said immediately. I know these ships better than anyone. I can reach their command center through the ventilation system and disable their coordination protocols. Marcus looked at her with obvious concern. That's a suicide mission. Those passages weren't designed for beings your size, and if you get caught, there won't be any backup. Someone has to do it, Zara replied firmly. These people deserve their freedom, just like you gave me mine. Besides, I'm not the helpless slave I was 3 weeks ago. You taught me that I have choices, and this is my choice. Before anyone could stop her, she had slipped into the nearest maintenance shaft and disappeared into the ship's infrastructure. The cramped spaces reminded her uncomfortably of her years in captivity, but now she moved with purpose rather than despair. Every meter she crawled brought her closer to striking a blow against the system that had stolen her life. The command center was lightly defended, its occupants focused on the battle raging in the lower corridors. Zara emerged from an overhead vent like an avenging spirit, her skin blazing with warrior patterns that her people had used in ancient times. The Krathan officers barely had time to register her presence before her stun weapon dropped them unconscious. Working quickly, she accessed the ship's central computer using codes she had memorized during her years of forced labor. The hegemony's standardized systems made it easy to locate critical functions. With a few keystrokes, she disabled the automated defenses, unlocked all remaining cage doors, and activated the general alarm system to create maximum confusion. The effect was immediate and devastating. The raiders' organized resistance collapsed as their equipment failed and their communications went dead. The rescue team broke through their lines easily, shepherding the freed prisoners toward the Defiance's docking bay. Zara made her way back through the chaos, helping stragglers and ensuring that no one was left behind. The sight of so many beings walking free after accepting slavery as their inevitable fate filled her with a fierce joy that set her entire body glowing like a beacon. As the last of the prisoners boarded the Defiance, the raider ship's engines began to fail. Zara's sabotage had been more thorough than she had initially intended. The hegemony vessel would be stranded in space until rescue arrived, giving the freed slaves time to disappear into the vast anonymity of the galactic frontier. Outstanding work, Marcus said as they cleared the area. You just proved that one person can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. Zara looked back at the disabled raider ship and felt a profound sense of completion. She had gone from victim to survivor to active participant in her own liberation. The journey wasn't over, but she finally understood what the humans meant when they spoke of earning freedom, rather than simply receiving it. The former slaves aboard the Defiance would face the same choices she had confronted. Who to become now that they were free to choose their own destinies. Some would join the crew, others would seek new lives elsewhere, but all of them would carry forward the knowledge that freedom was possible, even in a galaxy that seemed determined to crush hope. 6 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of Haven Station, watching as another group of liberated slaves began their journey toward new lives. The massive space habitat orbited a remote star in unclaimed territory, serving as a sanctuary for those fleeing oppression throughout the galaxy. What had started as Captain Chen's personal mission had evolved into something much larger. The station buzzed with activity as beings from hundreds of species worked together to build something unprecedented. A truly free society, former slaves worked alongside their rescuers as equals, contributing skills and knowledge that had been suppressed for generations. The result was a cultural renaissance unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. Zara's own transformation had been remarkable. No longer the broken creature from the slave markets, she had become one of Haven's most effective liberation coordinators. Her unique combination of insider knowledge and passionate commitment made her invaluable in planning rescue operations. More importantly, she had rediscovered her people's gift for emotional healing through bioluminescent art. "The new arrivals are asking for you specifically," said Commander Sarah Chen, Marcus's daughter and now Haven's security chief. "Word is spreading through the underground networks that there's a Zinthari here, who can help people remember what it feels like to hope." Zara nodded, checking her equipment one final time before heading to the arrival bay. Each group of rescued slaves faced the same overwhelming transition she had experienced, and she had made it her mission to ease their journey toward freedom. The healing sessions she conducted had become legendary throughout the frontier territories. The latest group was particularly challenging. Children who had been born into slavery and knew no other life. Their young minds struggled to comprehend concepts like choice and self-determination. Many had never even learned their birth names, knowing themselves only by inventory numbers and work assignments. "My name is Zara," she told them gently, her skin glowing with warm, welcoming patterns. "I was once where you are now, frightened and confused about what freedom means. But I learned that being free doesn't mean being alone. It means becoming part of something bigger than yourself." One young Andromedan boy raised his hand tentatively. "What if we're not good at being free? What if we don't know how?" "Freedom isn't something you're good or bad at," Zara explained, her luminescence shifting to reassuring blue-green hues. "It's something you learn, one choice at a time. The first choice is always the hardest. Do you want to try?" Over the following weeks, she worked with each child individually, helping them discover their own interests and talents. Some showed aptitude for technical skills, others for artistic pursuits or academic studies. All of them gradually learned to see themselves as individuals worthy of respect and care, rather than as property with assigned functions. The success of Haven Station had not gone unnoticed by the galactic powers. Trade Federation officials condemned it as a threat to established commerce, while hegemony forces had begun actively hunting for its location. The sanctuary's continued existence depended on maintaining absolute secrecy about its coordinates. Captain Chen, now Admiral Chen of the growing Liberation Fleet, called an emergency council meeting to address the escalating threats. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in Haven's central chamber, their diversity a testament to the universal desire for freedom. "Intelligence reports indicate that the hegemony is planning a major offensive against our operations," Chen announced. "They've allocated significant military resources to tracking down our bases and eliminating what they call the human contagion of equality." A Catherian counselor spoke up from the floor. "Perhaps it's time to consider a different approach. We've proven that liberation is possible on a small scale. Maybe we should focus on diplomatic solutions rather than direct confrontation." "With respect," Zara interjected, rising from her seat. "Diplomacy only works when both sides recognize each other's fundamental rights. The hegemony views us as diseased animals spreading dangerous ideas. They won't negotiate with people they refuse to acknowledge as people." Her words carried weight because everyone in the chamber knew her story. She had experienced the worst of galactic civilization and emerged stronger, becoming a symbol of what was possible when beings refused to accept their assigned roles in the cosmic hierarchy. "Then what do you propose?" asked Dr. Voss, now Haven's chief medical officer and head of psychological rehabilitation. Zara's skin flickered with determination as she considered her response. "We do what humans do best. We refuse to give up. Every being we liberate is a victory over the system that tried to break us. Every child who learns their own name instead of an inventory number is a revolution in miniature." She gestured toward the viewing ports where the station's population could be seen going about their daily lives in freedom. "Look at what we've built here. Look at what's possible when beings choose cooperation over domination. This isn't just a refugee camp or a military base. It's proof that their entire system is built on lies." The council session continued late into the station's artificial night, but a consensus gradually emerged. They would not retreat or compromise with those who denied their fundamental dignity. Instead, they would expand their operations, carrying the message of freedom to every corner of the galaxy, where sentient beings lived in chains. As the meeting adjourned, Zara found herself on the observation deck once again, watching the stars that held so many worlds full of potential allies. The galaxy was vast, and the forces arrayed against them were powerful. But she had learned something important during her journey from slave to liberator. Freedom was not a destination but a choice that had to be made repeatedly, in small acts of courage and large declarations of principle. Every being who chose to stand up rather than kneel down, every person who offered help instead of exploitation, every moment when compassion triumphed over cruelty, was a victory that could never be truly defeated. The humans had shown her that a single act of kindness could transform not just an individual life, but the entire trajectory of history. Now it was her turn to pass that lesson forward, one rescued soul at a time. 2 years after the liberation of Haven Station, the galactic balance of power had shifted in ways no one could have predicted. What began as Captain Chen's personal mission to free individual slaves had evolved into a movement that challenged the fundamental assumptions underlying galactic civilization. The Liberation Front now operated from dozens of hidden bases throughout the outer territories, each one a beacon of hope for the oppressed. Their influence extended far beyond military operations, as freed slaves spread throughout the galaxy, carrying new ideas about dignity, cooperation, and the inherent worth of all sentient life. Zara stood before the assembled representatives of the newly formed Free Worlds Alliance, a coalition of species that had chosen to abandon the traditional hierarchies of dominance and submission. Her role as ambassador seemed surreal given her origins, but she had learned that leadership often fell to those who understood suffering and chose compassion instead of revenge. The hegemony has agreed to a ceasefire, she announced to the gathered delegates, not because they've embraced our principles, but because the cost of maintaining their slave-based economy has become unsustainable. Too many of their subjects have learned that alternatives exist. The transformation hadn't been achieved through military conquest, but through something far more powerful, the simple act of demonstrating that different choices were possible. As word spread of planets where beings lived as equals rather than masters and slaves, entire sectors had begun questioning the systems that had oppressed them for millennia. Captain Chen, now graying at the temples but still possessed of the same moral clarity that had driven him to free Zara from that first slave market, approached the podium. The real victory isn't in the territories we've liberated or the fleets we've assembled. It's in the knowledge that sentient beings everywhere now carry, that they deserve better than what they've been given. The Alliance had grown far beyond its human origins. Catherian engineers worked alongside Andromedan scholars to develop new technologies that elevated, rather than exploited. Centauri artists collaborated with dozens of species to create cultural expressions that celebrated diversity, rather than enforcing conformity. Even former hegemony worlds had begun sending secret delegations, seeking guidance on transitioning to more equitable systems. Zara's own journey had come full circle in the most unexpected way. 3 months earlier, a diplomatic mission had brought her back to Kepler Station, the same slave market where Marcus had found her years before. But instead of cages and auctions, she found something extraordinary. A rehabilitation center where former slavers worked to make amends for their past crimes by helping to locate and free their former victims. The station manager, a reformed Graxian who had once sold children into industrial bondage, approached her with obvious shame and determination. "I know I can never undo what I did," he said simply, "but I want to spend whatever years I have left trying to heal the damage I helped cause." Such transformations were becoming common throughout the changing galaxy. The rigid certainties that had once seemed eternal were crumbling as beings discovered that change was not only possible but inevitable when enough people chose to act with courage and compassion. The Alliance meeting concluded with the signing of the Universal Declaration of Sentient Rights, a document that established principles of dignity and freedom as inalienable characteristics of consciousness rather than privileges to be earned or granted. Representatives from over 200 worlds affixed their names to the historic agreement. As the delegates dispersed to carry the message back to their home systems, Zara found herself once again standing before a viewport, looking out at stars that no longer seemed cold and distant. Each point of light represented worlds where beings were learning to see themselves and each other as partners in the great adventure of existence rather than competitors in an endless struggle for dominance. Dr. Voss joined her at the observation deck, her hair now silver but her eyes still bright with the curiosity that had driven her to heal minds as well as bodies. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Marcus hadn't walked past your cage that day?" she asked. Zara considered the question seriously. "I used to think it was pure chance, a random act of kindness that changed everything. But now I realize it was inevitable. Somewhere, someone was always going to refuse to accept the way things were and choose to make them better." Her skin glowed with gentle patterns of contentment and hope as she continued. "The humans taught us that freedom isn't a gift bestowed by the powerful. It's a choice made by the powerless to claim their own dignity. Once that choice is made, it spreads like wildfire because it speaks to something fundamental in every conscious mind." The galaxy was still far from perfect. There were systems where slavery persisted, worlds where oppression remained entrenched, and countless individuals who still suffered under the weight of institutional cruelty. But the foundation had been laid for something better, a future where the arbitrary divisions between master and slave, ruler and subject, valuable and worthless, could be recognized as illusions maintained only by those who profited from inequality. Zara's personal transformation from property to person had become a template for galactic evolution. Just as she had learned to see herself as worthy of respect and capable of choices, entire civilizations were discovering that their assumed limitations were largely self-imposed. The universe was vast enough for everyone to flourish if they could abandon the zero-sum thinking that had dominated galactic politics for millennia. As she watched the ships departing Haven Station carry their messages of hope to distant worlds, Zara knew that the work was far from finished. But she also knew that it would continue, carried forward by beings who had learned the most important lesson of all, that sentient life was too precious to waste on systems of domination and control. The human who had freed her from slavery had given her more than liberty. He had shown her that every conscious being carried within themselves the power to change, not just their own circumstances, but the fundamental nature of the civilization they inhabited. That knowledge, once awakened, could never be fully suppressed. Freedom, she had learned, was indeed contagious.